and welcome to P&P Live. My name is Heidi, and I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator at Politics and Prose. Thank you for joining us and tuning into this virtual format where we continue to bring authors and new books to you. I have the pleasure of hosting our event this evening, and I am delighted to welcome our guest, Dr. Dana Suskind, in conversation with Katherine Goldstein. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. If you would like to have closed captioning for this event, please look at the bottom of your screen and click on Live Transcript and then select Show Subtitle. You can click the link that we will drop into the chat to get your own copy of the New York Times best-selling book, Parent Nation: Unlocking Every Child's Potential, Fulfilling Society's Promise. If you have a question for our guests, you can click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and add one there. At the end of the presentation, our guests will have time to answer some of your questions. You can also upvote the questions that you like and want most answered. Now onto the event that you're waiting for. Dr. Dana Suskind is founder and co-director of the TMW Center for Early Learning and Public Health, director of the Pediatric Cochlear Implant Program, and professor of surgery, pediatrics, and public policy at the University of Chicago. A recognized thought leader on the national stage, Dr. Suskind has dedicated her research and clinical life to optimizing foundational brain development and preventing early cognitive disparities and their lifelong impact. Dr. Suskind is the author of over 45 scientific publications and the book 30 Million Words, Building a Child's Brain. She is a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics and a fellow for the Council on Early Childhood. Katherine Goldstein's articles on mothers at work, issues facing caregivers, and gender equity have been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Time, Vox, and The Guardian. She's a Harvard Nieman Journalism Fellow, consultant, and public speaker. Her research and reporting has been supported by the Ford Foundation, the Better Life Lab at New America, and the Economic Hardship Reporting Project. Katherine is also the creator of the Double Shift newsletter, podcast, and member community, which is a laboratory for social change work for moms. She lives in Durham, North Carolina, and is the mom of 3, including pandemic twins. It is my pleasure to turn the event over to them.
Thank you so much, Heidi and Politics and Prose, for having us. This is very exciting.
Very exciting.
All right, so I am honored to be here with, she told me to call her Dana, with Dana, New York Times bestseller of this wonderful book. And we are, of course, going to dive in to talk about this really fascinating work. But before we do that, I just want to start off by just acknowledging a bit the stress that so many parents are facing right now with the baby formula crisis. And it feels like we can't talk about early childhood and public policy failure today in this moment in 2022 without addressing what's happening with the baby formula crisis. So as a pediatric surgeon and someone, who has really committed your life to ensuring that every child has the best start possible, I know we agree this is a completely unacceptable situation. And I would love it if you could just share a few thoughts on what this crisis really exposes about our societal priorities beyond sort of this acute moment.
Yeah, no, first of all, Katherine, thank you so much for joining me. Really, I am a huge fan of your work. As I said, been following you for quite some time. So it's my honor to be with you.
I'm honored to interview you.
Yeah. Well, look, I love that you're starting off with that question because like so many, including you, I am outraged, heartbroken, but sadly not surprised to see, families, mothers, children abandoned this way. And it's almost like the most concrete illustration of what I consider, society's biggest failure. It's complete abdication of responsibility to families, and particularly during the early years of a child's life. We talk a whole lot about family values in our society, but it is so clear that we are not centered on families, children, mothers especially. We haven't built programs or policies that promote or protect those values, and really quite the opposite. In my work, and I know in your writing, we put daunting barriers in the path of so many families, mothers and fathers, from mundane issues like irregular work hours that complicate childcare and actually have significant impact on children's outcomes, to profound structural problems like systemic racism that hold back sizable portions of our population. And all these barriers limit time, energy that parents can devote to their children and really hold back the next generation. So this formula shortage is obscene, and it's just one more indicator of what we already know, that we don't center our country and our world on families. And the truth is, we know that one factor that contributed to this crisis was the closure of the Michigan facility owned by Abbott, right? That had spent billions of dollars on stock buyouts in recent years rather than fixing the production issue. Once again, putting short-term gain, putting profits in front of what we know is best for families. So yeah, like you and like so many people, it is just one more concrete manifestation. We don't even feed our children.
Right. Well, the barriers to just the most simple thing of feeding our children are so vast. I mean, I feel like there's a level of outrage and a level of, just sort of people who just can't believe that after everything families have been through, we are at this place after the last 2 years and, decades of failed social policy for families. Do you see any possible long-term good coming out of the awareness this has brought? There's been some changes to WIC policy. There's some, awareness about how important formula is. There's been awareness that not everyone can breastfeed, which is just amazing that we have to be sure people are aware of that here in 2022. But do you see anything positive coming out of this really dire situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, we have to maintain optimism for sure. And in truth, I think we all are starting to see people waking up to the unsustainability of, just the whole structure of our country in terms of support for families. I always say that the pandemic is sort of one of those, if not now, when scenarios. At the same time, we seem sort of stuck, but I am optimistic. I think the crisis is really accelerating the trend that we're noticing, that more and more parents are looking around and noticing that, that they aren't alone. I mean, I think that so many parents, at least in my discussions and work, feel like they're the only ones suffering and struggling, but they're realizing that they're not alone and that this is not an individual failure, but rather, an issue of society failing them. So I think that is a positive, because certainly, when parents repeat the same stories over and over again, you realize it's not personal, it's systemic, and systemic problems require systemic solutions. So I think that we're seeing this growing conviction that something needs to happen. At the same time, there's this, we're seeing these norm shifts. I mean, certainly in the role of corporate America. I mean, maybe it's because, talent is so hard to come by and, parents are, as you say, being forced out of the workplace. But I do see those changes. At the same time, this sort of individualism has, I think, stymied our demanding, but hopefully that'll change. So yes, I'm positive.
Good. I'm glad I definitely go through waves of maintaining optimism and deep pessimism. It depends on what day and what hour it is, but it's definitely good to have a dose of optimism. As we think about change. One of my favorite pandemic quotes is from Arundhati Roy, which is, the pandemic is a portal and where it takes us is up to us. And I do feel like we are at this moment where it feels like things are not going in the right way, but it is still possible to sort of influence the future coming out of this, long-term social crisis. So on to this idea of individualism. I'm obsessed with individualism culture in parenting and how harmful it is. I call it toxic individualism in our parenting culture. And I think for a long time, people are starting to question it, but so much of the American ethos around parenting was about making it on your own. And, finding personal solutions. Just that one lunch packing strategy is going to make it all work out for you. That one daycare slot is going to make, your life livable, all that stuff. And then feeling like a personal failure when things don't work out, even if there's so much stacked against us. And so you have sort of an example and metaphor of that at the start of Parent Nation about how much we leave parents out, leave parents on their own and expect them to survive and thrive in just really difficult conditions. That really struck me. I thought it was like one of the most sort of beautiful passages about what we expect of parents and how we're not supporting them. And so I was hoping that you could read, and really sort of laying out, like, if we treated parents like, if we treated surgeons like we treat parents, basically. So if you wouldn't mind reading that passage, it's at the beginning of the book. And I think that will really help, hopefully open people's minds in the same way it opened my mind to this, how individualistic our culture is and how much more parents need to be supported.
Yeah, it's true. If the world treated surgeons the way they do parents, nobody would allow their children to be taken back into the operating room, right? So here, my old eyes. So, thank you. All right. Before I start the operation, we double check that everything is in order. Do we have the right patient? Check. Do we have the correct implant with all the right instruments? Check. Do we know if the patient has any medical allergies? Check. Are the preoperative antibiotics in? Check. The routine ensures the accuracy and safety of what we are doing. Each person in the operating room plays an essential role. No one forgets why we are here, to help a child. As a surgeon performing delicate work just millimeters from the brain, I have no room for error. It's critical that I have my necessary tools and, even more importantly, my A-team by my side. If any of this carefully crafted system falls away, no matter my skill or good intentions, my job will be infinitely more difficult. Some obstacles can be overcome. A few missing instruments, for instance. But what if the power went out in the hospital and I suddenly had to operate without light or oxygen? Or what if Robin, Gary, and Nelson suddenly walked out the door, leaving me alone? The odds would be stacked against me and the job would seem impossible. The challenge of successfully rearing children is not so different. To raise a child into a happy, healthy adult capable of achieving their full potential, you need a plan and you need an appropriate, safe environment, one that provides backup as required. But far too many parents are not operating, that is, parenting in an optimal environment. For far too many parents in our country and throughout the world, it's as if they're trying to function in the midst of an endless power failure, asked to achieve a critical goal without the necessary tools or any backup.
Wow. So I hope people can kind of sit with that. And I feel like the image of being a parent in America is standing in an operating room with no oxygen and no power. You cannot do these things without resource, and you cannot, no matter how skilled and rock star of a surgeon you are, you cannot do this without the support team that ensures safety and ensures that everything goes smoothly and supports you, So, I think that I wish, I feel like it's such a powerful passage. I want everyone to just marinate on it.
Well, because it's really interesting. We have confused this idea, because of this sort of saying, it takes a village to raise a child. It was Angela Duckworth who said, actually, or somebody else said it, it's only a parent or caregiver can raise a child, but it takes a village to support a parent or caregiver in that role. And this idea of American individualism, that we have to be tough and go it alone, going back to the settlers, really has seeped into this idea of parenting. And we've confused the fact that, yes, as parents, we are the ones who raise the children according to our values. And let me be clear, as a social scientist, neuroscientist, there are many ways to parent a child and do it well, right? This is not about one way to parent. There's only one way to build a brain, but there are many ways to parent a child. But because of this American individualism, the mythic idea of American individualism, we've convinced parents, especially mothers, they've internalized that this is a go it alone situation. And when things are hard, right? I heard from one mom, Talia, she said, I felt, and she's a PhD in developmental psychology. She said, I felt like I was failing in all parts of my life. Instead of saying, why is society failing me so that I can't raise my children and provide society with the knowledge that I've been, that I've been working for as a PhD. So yeah, no, I think it gets in the way of parenting.
Yes, I love, bringing neuroscience to this discussion about, and, putting it into a much larger perspective about how not only is it a choice to be individualistic, it's harmful to ourselves and to society as a whole to have these expectations of ourselves and of each other in parenting culture. So if this is sparking any questions in our audience, feel free to go ahead and type any questions or comments in the Q&A, and we're going to do some Q&A at the end, but as they come up, we're going to have a very rich discussion. So feel free to type them as they come up for you. So, I really encourage everyone to read the book in order to understand, the details about your research and brain development and how incredibly crucial that is. And I think from a non-scientist, as a non-scientist, but mother of toddlers, it's very fascinating to read sort of this interesting research and sort of see it in practice in my own life. So I definitely recommend people really dive into that. And I feel like you've done a great job of using illustrative stories rather than just like, here's like some data and this is the brain and here's the brain part and here's the part where the brain does this. Like it's very, very easy to read and understand for non-scientists. So I highly recommend that. But I just want to sort of, sometimes I was reading about these different things that we do to, give our kids really rich language environments and, create stable home life and all these sorts of things that set them up for success. But, as a mom of 3 little kids, including twins born during the pandemic, I really can relate to parents who, sometimes fear that the months or years of survival mode that many of us have faced without social supports, like, I'm not going to speak to everyone's situation, but, in the last few years and through many decades, people have dealt with trauma and financial problems. And, it's easy to wonder if our stress or our mental health or our grief or instability has negatively affected our children's development, especially, in these first 3 years of life. And you reflect on this as a mother of older children saying like, oh, I wish I'd known some of this when my children were a little younger. But, what would you say to Parent Nation? What would you say to parents who are reading Parent Nation and think, wow, like I wasn't able to do this amazing stuff for my kids. Did I harm them? Was I too stressed? Was I depressed? It wasn't ideal that they were born during a pandemic, any of these things. Like, how would you ease these anxieties?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important question. And it was something that in my first book, 30 Million Words, people would often say, oh gosh, the first 3 years of life are so important, and now my kids are 5. Look, first of all, this is a population level issue. This is not, there's huge individual differences. And the truth is, the story is not ever that it's too late. It is never too late. The brain, there's the rapid period of brain growth in the first 3 years of life, but the brain continues to grow and have neuroplasticity throughout a lifetime. And it is absolutely never too late. And, the truth is, there's something called good enough parenting. There's no doubt that our, stress is not good. And we have to understand that society and the societal role in the lack of structures are playing into it. In some ways, I think that can relieve some of our stress because it's not all on us. But even more importantly, there is something called good enough parenting. As a parent of older children, and trust me, not only, even before my late husband died, and let me tell you, when you lose your children's father, you think, oh my gosh, are my kids going to be okay? I mean, there's, that is, especially even during the pandemic, that is a huge stressor. But yes, there is good enough parenting and it's never too late. And, and yes, we need to change society, but it'll be okay. But, if you asked me, the funny thing is, if you asked me, Katherine, if I had a magic wand and I could change everything, the 60 million parents raising children at the individual level and give them all the right scientific insights and the tools to optimize their children's brains, et cetera, versus a magic wand to change the societal construct in which these parents live, I would absolutely choose the latter, because at the end of the day, all parents want what's best for their children. They just want to get their children off to the best possible start. And it's frankly time that we recognize as a society that we're getting in the way, and that we need to really, change those things. But yes, no, it's never too late. And I don't want to contribute to any of that feeling of stress. I don't want to be a stress inducer.
Right. Well, so, part of it is that to see this as an individual edict or individual failure is like the opposite of the message of the book. Because it's,
yes, please, I would, there's individuals or it's society that needs to, that's really why I wrote the book, right? I always say if we didn't have one more scientific study to say the early years and parents and caregivers were important, we would be fine. We have so much information. We've got the economic case. If we didn't have one more economic study showing the huge return on investment or the savings for, corporate America, we wouldn't have it. We've got enough. We just need the public will to make it happen.
So on to the topic of public will. I could talk to you about public will all day. That's one of my favorite topics. But again, endless studies. Every dollar you invest in early childhood education reaps 5 times return, blah, blah, blah. We have endless economic studies about why all of these things are really good. But, one of the things that I really like about your book, it's not just about investing in an early childhood education program. You also talk about, what is possible for kids and their brain development when parents don't have to work 3 jobs or they don't have to live in a homeless shelter. Like, these social factors are so important to, how kids grow up. And it's not just about whether or not they get a Head Start spot, which is Head Start is great, but that's only one aspect of it. So I'm curious if the book and the brain science research behind it is opening up some new conversations or receptivity with policymakers or funders, because again, we've had these economic arguments for a long time, and I know the book has only been out for a few weeks, but I'm curious if people, as I spoke to a stress researcher, who said, just put a brain on it. If you put a picture of a brain, people take things more seriously. But do you feel like that bringing in this neuroscientific element is helping break through some of those sort of inaction or?
Oh gosh, I go back and forth. For me, we all come into this issue of children and families in different ways. You come in through the gender equity, some come in through the civil rights. Because I'm a pediatric surgeon, I come in through early child development. I really used the lens of the neuroscience as a way to sort of chart out a path for all of society, because it's a way to bring it all together. Has it allowed have people been more receptive? It's hard to tell. Look, I think, you know what I really think, Catherine? I think that people understand, people get it, right? I think policymakers get it. I think they get it on both sides of the aisle. They just don't feel accountable to us, to parents. So I really used it because I thought it was a really great framework. With my first book, 30 Million Words, I found that people need a framework that they can get behind, that's easy to sort of understand. And obviously I've distanced myself from that, but in some ways, calling it Parent Nation and using the lens of healthy brain development, not only do you get the boon and important human development aspect, that children, we're raising the next generation, but you get the positive impacts on gender equity, you get the impacts on civil rights. So you get it all. Yes, they're interested in it. Does it make them, any more receptive? I think they already get it. At the end of the day, they look at it, the private sector, corporate leaders are interested in it. Why? Because they can learn lessons to attract and retain talent. In the midst of the Great Resignation, some companies are finally recognizing that they need to make changes, to adopt family-friendly policies to help their, bottom line. So I may be naive, but I think it's just one more, part of the argument that needs to be made to say, yes, we need to do something. So.
Well, so yeah, I mean, maybe it's also just one more piece of the puzzle saying this is about economics. This is also about brain development. So, just one more concrete thing in the arsenal about why this is important. But you said something that I want to pick up on, which is that you think policymakers and people in power get it. They do not feel accountable to us to do anything about it. So this is where I think Parent Nation comes in, and your whole idea for a Parent Nation, which is creating lobbying and advocacy and, a voting bloc and a larger, community pressure for these kinds of, family-friendly policies, which hasn't really existed. And, you talk about, as an example, the AARP, which is a really large special interest group. And, they've had huge success in political organizing. No politician wants to cross them. And they've done really great work in raising the standard of living for retired people. So in your opinion, what has stopped parents from uniting like this in the past? There are a lot of us. And how do we overcome those barriers now?
I love that question. And look, these poor policymakers, we need to help them because they want to do the right thing.
You're so
right?
generous.
Look, I'm also married to an economist. We respond to incentives, and we've got to help them. We've got to help them see that actually to make good on we're about families. And why haven't we? And then I'll tell you why I think the ARP is such a bright spot. Look, I think at the bottom line, one is we have ye little expectation. I mean, obviously people like you and people, we're hearing more and more discussion about it, but by far and away, when you look across the country, there is, it still felt very much like a personal issue. Someone said it's sort of like we view having children like having a puppy. I think you actually were the one who said it, but of course, puppies can't be separated from their mothers, but adults, humans can. But we have no expectation. So if we have no expectation, we're not going to demand it because of this American individualism and this feeling of failure. And then we have no collective identity. When we look to the left, we look to the right, we see someone else who is a parent, but we don't see them as an ally, someone who, just like us, just want to give our children the best possible start. So we lack these two important components for this larger societal shift and movement. And in my research, I've really become very excited around the ARP. Why? Because, half a century plus ago, who were the poorest, most underserved segment of society? It wasn't like children today are the poor segment of our society, under 5. It's an obscenity, right? Children and their parents. Back then, it was the elderly. Over 50% lived below the minimum standards of decency. They had no political voice. They didn't vote. They were living in chicken coops. And the AARP and the Gray Lobby changed all of that. The passage of Medicare and Social Security, no age demographic is better served by society. And justifiably, they've helped contribute dramatically to societies. And, not only have they gotten it passed, but they've prevented it from rolling back. And we know, I can tell you stories of other positive maternal child health policies that have been rolled back. Anyway, so just through bringing their collective voice, they've shifted what it means to be elderly in this country. And I think parents and caregivers, anyone who cares about children, can be that for each other. Because I can tell you as a physician, there is no greater, more passionate advocate for our children than parents and caregivers. I mean, we will go to the ends of the earth. We bring that collective voice together and push forward policies that help all parents. I mean, one of the one of the positives of the first 5 years of life, ironically, is that it is totally devoid of any support, right? We don't have any support, whether or not you want to be a stay-at-home parent or a working parent, we have nothing. So we have everything to gain by pushing forward, not just policies, but, employer-based policies, social norms. So yes, we need a parent AARP or National Association of Parents or Caregivers, whatever we want to call it.
Well, so, I think a lot about why hasn't this happened yet? And I have a couple of theories, which is one, parents who with children under 5 are the most tired and stressed, and they have the least resource to advocate for themselves. And then once they're out of it, they sort of like, thank God I don't have to do that anymore. And they move on. So, that's, one element of just that we don't have non-parent allies also advocating with us, especially, non-mothers specifically. So I think that is one element. And I mean, another element of it is, frankly, I think racism is just that, people are very individualistic about what they can get for their kids, and they don't really care about, white mothers are not, they want to maintain their position of power within white patriarchy, and they don't want to they're not interested in advocating for lots of poor kids of color. They're interested in making sure their kid gets into the right public school. So and I think that's very, very much what?
Yeah, no. I want to respond to all.
I think that's very much rooted in a lot of historical racism, why parents are not banding together. And being a public school parent right now in 2022, things are relatively calm at my school and my district compared to some other places, but these are literally like slaughtering battlegrounds over so many things. Very much does not feel like parents are coming together. So I would love to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. And remember, I really, much of my work and my focus is the first 5 years of life before kids get into school. And, look, related to that, and I don't, obviously I'm not in that space, but, when you can't control the larger factors, you control the things that you feel like you can control. But the first 5 years of life, which I think are really the time where we leave parents on their own all the time, but in the first 5 years of life, we have a total void of supports. And this is exactly when children could most benefit from it, right? From neural connections. And this is across, except for the top 1%, pretty much all parents are. And you bring up the really good point that it's a limited period of time. It's only 5 years. My husband calls it the revolving door problem. But that's exactly why having an AARP type organization is helpful, right? I mean, most, they are 38 million strong, but most people don't view themselves as social activists, right? And most people are too busy, and certainly parents in the first 5 years of life, I mean, gosh. And that's why having an organization that really advocates on the best interests of all, right? Because the AARP, single-handedly decreased poverty rates by 70%. They're, believe it or not, 1/3 Republican, 1/3 Democrat, 1/3 independent, which seems just like a surreal, impossible time. So yes, it feels like a really tall order, but I think people, I'm hoping, here's the optimist Dana again, but I think people are tired of being, except for the very, very extremes, are tired of being divided. And this is an opportunity to come together on behalf of literally our next generation. And so let's do it, Katherine.
Yes, I'm sold. You don't have to sell me. Dedicating my life to this. So yeah.
You already have, yeah.
But yeah, I think that this is very, so I think, but also, getting people to a place where it's like, if they want to advocate for universal pre-K in their county, they may never benefit from that personally, but it's about sort of like what we are going to contribute to the world in the long haul. And I think that, helping people understand that, and that's why we do all sorts of interesting, charity or altruistic work. It's not always just about what we personally can gain from it. So I have one more question for you, and then we're going to start taking questions from the audience. So please go ahead and put your questions in if you would like to ask Dana, not Dr. Suskind. We're in a Dana friend. We're just Dana and Katherine. I got my wine. We're just enjoying ourselves here.
Unless somebody wants a surgery, then
unless someone wants a surgery. If you're here for pediatric implant consult related to your hearing, then
Katherine, we've got twins. I always say childcare keeps me in business. No, I'm just joking.
So I feel like in some ways, the end of Parent Nation, where you encourage people to start coming together and advocating around these issues, as we were just talking about, this AARP for for parents, and you have resources and you have a website where you're trying to connect people and get them, engaged on these issues. Like, it actually felt like this was the start of the next book to me. Like, this was like the first few pages of what happens next. I'm sure you're like, don't want to think about writing another book, but it felt like
your book. That's your book, Katherine, and I'll be interviewing you.
But so I would love to hear, and can you please share with our audience, like, how does Parent Nation go beyond the pages of the book? And, what are you seeing so far? What do you hope to see?
Yeah, well, I can tell you all my hopes and dreams. I mean, the truth of the matter is, look, I'm a surgeon. I don't like leaving things up to chance. With my first book, I wrote it hoping that, like, sharing the science of early brain development, that it would have led to societal shifts. Because I figured, if you can pull a surgeon out of the operating room, well, certainly, then we'd start, supporting parents and caregivers as they should. Well, that didn't happen. So this book is my hope that this sort of neuroscience as a pathway forward for society attempt, Hail Mary, but, towards that end, not leaving things up to chance. My team and I have an amazing team, and like anything, sort of like the invisible labor sort of fallacy that anybody can do it all. I am one of an amazing team, Yoli Flores, Heidi Stevens, Liz Sablick, and John Wenger, amongst many, many. But we've developed on the website, and Yoli Flores is leading it, the ground campaign, free suite of tools and resources that can be used by individuals, employers, and organizations that work with parents that include an action guide, a book club guide, and a curriculum that you can host. We call them parent villages. You can call them whatever you want, but where small groups of parents can come together to support one another, identify and discuss the needs of families in their communities, and make a plan of action. There's even a really cool thing called the Big Shift tool, which invites people to both see their needs and where they get them, which is usually on their shoulders, and reimagine a society in the way they want, their magic wand to imagine a society that actually puts children and families at the center. So we're partnering with organizations across the country. I think now like 400 plus groups have downloaded the material, but we've talked to thousands of people. And, I just want it to be, a curriculum that can be used in any way that people want. This is not my thing or anybody's thing. This is the narrative that needs to be elevated. So.
That's awesome. And that's great that that's so easily available to people to check out. And I love the idea of people reading this book in community. And I love the idea of people envisioning what kind of world they'd want, because to me, a lot of times people get, so stuck because we've been failed as a society, failed parents. People have a really hard time even imagining what it could be like, to sort of in a different world. And so the website for that is parentnation.org.
Yeah, it's okay. Parentnation.org. Yeah.
Parentnation.org. Okay.
I think you're right. Like it's so hard to imagine it being a different world, right? And I'm sure the elderly back in 1950 couldn't imagine a world where so many didn't live in poverty. But I actually think that it can be different. I mean, we just need to look at other countries. And I know everybody looks at Scandinavian countries, but the truth is Finland was not too dissimilar to us, and their education system was not good. And they're smaller, they single-handedly really changed what it looks like in that country. And we are such an outlier that we just need to be a good enough country, like good enough parenting. I mean, we don't need to be, well, I'd like us to be, like the Scandinavian countries, but, paid leave and a little bit of high quality childcare would be a nice start. So.
Right. But the idea that we're like an outlier of terrible, basically, whatever the opposite of American exceptionalism is, it's like in terms of
change.
Right. We can't change.
It's growth mindset. We need a societal, we talk about growth mindset for our children, work harder, we talk about it for parenting. We need a societal growth mindset. We can do this.
I love this energy. This is making me feel good. I think that, yeah, I feel like the growth mindset, I mean, to me, you know, it really comes down to this idea, it comes back to this idea of things will change when people in power feel accountable to change them. So that's why I love that there's really an activist piece part of this whole message. So we have a question from Daisy, which is similar, you know, on this theme of activism. What can parents take from the AARP beginnings, energy to create a new version of the Comprehensive Child Development Act that failed back in the 1970s. So for those of us who are nerds and know about failed public policies from the 70s and cry about them late at night, we are, some people may or may not know about this. So, you know, that's another thing, as you mentioned, like we have actually had great legislation proposed or very great legislation happen for a hot second, great legislation passed and then get vetoed. So that have set us back. So if you want to just share a little bit about, you know, we've had, people have thought about this before and they worked hard on legislation. And so if you want to share a little bit about the Comprehensive Child Development Act, you know, we're not reinventing the wheel here actually. So share a little bit about that and sort of like, you know, could we rally people around not just like we need childcare, but like this is what it would look like and this is what we should, you know, rethink.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually in chapter 7, I talk about the Comprehensive Child Development Act, amongst other things. The Comprehensive Child Development Act, I think it was in 71. And it was, you know, if it had passed back then, I wouldn't be had to write this book, and Katherine would be doing, she'd be working somewhere in a different area. It was in it just, you know, an overhaul of the system, really responding to so many women going into the workforce that would have provided, you know, high quality childcare. And it wasn't just about working women, but even for stay-at-home moms, there was aspects of support. It was pretty cool. And Nixon was in office at that point. And ironically, he had actually run on a ticket related to, you know, supporting young children, which is sort of interesting. And it had bipartisan support. It was going to really change this country. And at the 11th hour, Nixon, he had 2 speeches, one saying he's going to accept it, one that he vetoed it. At the 11th hour, he actually ended up vetoing it. And it's a really interesting story, tragic story of how he did and why he got to that point, but it was red baiting and amongst other things. And basically, you know, drove a stake through the heart of any hope of having a comprehensive childcare infrastructure. And as a result, we are where we are today. And you could say, well, with bipartisan support, how is it that this happened, right? Nobody felt accountable, because at this moment in time, it was very interesting during that period of time, because, right, that was the time of civil rights, equal rights, the AARP, Social Security, Medicare. And I often think that it didn't pass because there was no parent lobby to say, yes, we need this, right? We had, you know, the women's movement, we had the AARP, all of those movements helped ensure things kept going forward, but we didn't. So you fast forward 50 years, I start writing this book and I actually think, gosh, that is a great model. Little did I know that we'd have Build Back Better and, you know, all of this stuff happening. And I thought, okay, well, maybe this is going to pass now. Or maybe I didn't have to write this book, or maybe it's, you know, I mean, it's still hopefully an interesting book. And once again, you see the needs of children and families, you know, going by the wayside. And I've come to realize that really, unless we get a way to have a unified voice and a lobby, that this is going to happen over and over again. And there are many other stories. Sorry, was that too long-winded of an answer, Katherine?
No, that was great. So we have some other questions. Laura Wren is giving a shout out. Parent Villages resources, love this work. Can National Association for Young Children be invested in this work? And I think the larger question also is like coalition building. Like I feel like, especially coming out of the pandemic, as being part of this work, people are excited to build coalitions. I feel like there's a lot of camaraderie and spirit in sharing resources. You know, how are you thinking about coalition building and, you know, in order to, you know, add on to what other movements are doing to bring other people along. Talk a little bit about coalition building and how important it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really want to emphasize, I am just a part of a much larger sort of wave across the country with incredible people, building and leading. And so we are all about contributing to what's happening as opposed to leading. With that being said, I think that the resources that have been developed, and I give a huge shout out for Yoli Flores, are amazing and can help provide sort of unified, some common language. So to answer, it is all about coalition building. That is the only way things are going to shift. The whole part of the problem is that so often we talk about, is it high quality childcare? Is it the child credit? Is it, paid leave? Is it, is it portable benefits? And really we need a unified voice. I mean, if the AARP, we have to decide what our non-negotiables are. Like the AARP have said, Social Security and Medicare, right? Those are our non-negotiables, and we all have to come around it. So Laura, absolutely, and shoot me an email or go on the website, and we will get back to you and share everything that we have. So.
Next question is from Taylor Calderon. To what extent do you think our current professional climate, i.e. the lean-in philosophy, tells parents, especially mothers, that caregiving isn't work and that their real job is at the office? As a millennial female of the sandwich generation, I left the paid workforce to care for my ill parents and very young children. I feel that many parents make choices because they feel like they will irreparably tarnish their career for any break. So here, I think, before I let you answer, this is fine. But I will just say that, we are having a dramatic change in how we think about care and work in the last 2 years. That is, I think, sped up the conversation, faster than it's sped in the last 30 in terms of valuing that all care is work, and that, every mother works, and that this, really trying to shift beyond these binaries of working versus stay-at-home parent. I personally no longer use the term working mother because I think it diminishes the contributions that others make. And I use the term employed mother or workforce mother because I think that the implication just doesn't work for me about what a non-working mother is. So Dana, I'll let you take it from here in terms of how the professional climate fits in with all of this.
No, that's a great question. And Taylor, I know I recognize your name, and so you are awesome. So I think it's really about reframing what it is to raise children, right? If we think of it in the individualistic, I'm having a puppy and it's for my own good, this is not talking about the unpaid caregiving. That's one thing. But the truth is that I think we need a reframe, right? Raising the next generation is literally one of the most important things for our country, right? You are raising the next wave of employees, doctors, lawyers, journalists, truck drivers. And so I think this reframe is critical to address exactly this issue. In terms of, and also seeing how the lack of societal structures, the societal structure impacts our ability to, I don't know, term lean in, lean out. I can tell you very interestingly, Taylor, my daughter, works in San Francisco, her first recommendation when she got her job right out of college was, look, to get ahead was not to get an advanced degree, not to network more. It was to hold off on having children for as long as you can. And I think that just points to the lack of not only, valuing of caregiving, but the lack of societal supports to allow us, if you want to do both, or if you want to stay home. I mean, we just have to reframe this whole narrative. So
we have time for one more audience question. If anyone is lurking, waiting to ask their question, I have many questions I can ask Dana, So if you have a last question to throw in there, go for it. I mean, I think, you know, there's so many different directions we could end on, but you know, to bring it home with some other timely topics, you know, we think about the lack of support for families, like how many families are struggling right now. Is there a way to really fully unite and bring into the conversation both people who are working for reproductive justice in this incredibly fraught time with, you know, this, I feel like there's a new understanding of how much all these issues intertwine. And, you know, I'm wondering if you feel like there, in your optimism, is there new moments for collaboration? How are you thinking about your work in the context of the potential end of Roe? Just a light one, just a light softball right there.
Yeah, thanks. No, I mean, look, I think we do best in this world when we, you know, we talk about parental choice in this country, right? And to have parental choice, you need to have choices. So I actually think the more choices we have as individuals, especially as women, the more in line we are with the country that we want. Was that a good response?
Yeah.
Know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. So we are, I think, we'll end on that note. And Heidi from Politics and Prose is back, so I will turn it back over, and thank you everyone for listening and joining, and I hope you buy and enjoy the book.
Oh, Dana and Katherine, thank you so much for that robust and very passionate conversation. I feel like we are all so very lucky that you have chosen to answer this call and are in this field. We all are so much richer for it. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. And a reminder, as Katherine mentioned, you can still have time to get your copy of Parent Nation. The stories in it are really, really touching. So thank you for all of those. And they're just really, you know, and I think the empathy that you have for all the people you work with is just so clear from reading the book. So thank you for all your work with that. And thank you to our audience for all the wonderful questions that you asked tonight. And Katherine, for your wonderful moderation. And Dana, thank you so much for your book. We really appreciate everything that you're doing. So thank you all very much. And thank you everyone for being here tonight and being part of this.
And thank you, Katherine. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. And I hope everyone enjoys many rich being part of the Parent Nation.
Tell your kids I'm sorry.